Welcome to Fear Files, where the echoes of history resonate with chilling whispers. Join us as Sebastian navigates a perilous path between worlds, uncovering secrets that threaten to unravel the very fabric of existence. Welcome to a realm where every artifact holds a story and every whisper hints at untold horrors. Welcome to Fear Files.
The mansion's oppressive silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the distant echoing cries of unseen spirits. The sense of dread that had pervaded the air now settled deep within Lisa's bones as she stumbled through the winding corridors, Mac's hand gripping her arm with a vice-like intensity. The ornate yet decayed opulence of the mansion seemed to press in on them, the walls closing in, suffocating in their antiquated grandeur. "Mac, where are we going?" Lisa's voice trembled, each word laden with fear. "Out," Mac replied tersely, his eyes darting around, searching for an exit. "We need to get out." Their footsteps echoed through the hallways, mingling with the ghostly whispers that seemed to come from every shadow. The air grew colder with each step, their breath visible in the dim, flickering light. They turned a corner and found themselves in a grand ballroom, its once majestic chandeliers now hanging like skeletal remnants from the ceiling, their crystals dulled and covered in dust. The room was vast, a cavernous space that seemed to stretch on forever in the gloom. The faded remains of what must have been luxurious drapes hung limply from tall windows, and a long, ornate table sat in the center, set with a feast that had long since rotted away. The smell of decay was overpowering, mingling with the scent of damp and mildew. "Mac, this place is wrong. We have to find the others and get out of here," Lisa whispered, her voice barely audible. I know, Mac said, his voice edged with frustration and fear. "But we have to stay calm. We need to think." A sudden noise shattered the silence, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from the very walls. Lisa's eyes widened in terror as a shadowy figure appeared at the far end of the ballroom, its form barely discernible in the dim light. The figure moved with an unnatural grace, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. "Mac, what is that?" Lisa's voice was a high-pitched whisper, her hand gripping his arm tightly. "I don't know, but we need to move. Now!" Mac pulled her toward a side door, his heart pounding in his chest. They burst through the door and found themselves in a narrow, twisting hallway. The walls here were lined with portraits, their subjects' eyes seeming to follow them as they ran past. Meanwhile, Tony and Danny were not faring much better. They had managed to find a small, hidden room behind a tapestry, where they now huddled together, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The room was filled with strange artifacts, ancient weapons, grotesque statues, and books bound in what looked disturbingly like human skin. "Tony, we're in deep shit," Danny said, his voice shaking. "Those things, they're not human." "I know," Tony replied, his own voice trembling. "But we can't just sit here. We need to find a way out." As they moved to leave the room, one of the statues seemed to shift slightly, its eyes glowing with a sinister light. Tony stopped, staring at it in horror. The statue's face twisted into a grotesque grin, its mouth opening to emit a low, mocking laugh. "Run!" Tony shouted, pushing Danny ahead of him. They fled the room, the sound of the statue's laughter echoing behind them. The mansion seemed to come alive around them, doors slamming shut, walls shifting, as if it were trying to trap them within its nightmarish confines. Back in the twisting hallway, Mac and Lisa stumbled upon a staircase leading down into darkness. The air grew colder as they descended, the oppressive atmosphere weighing heavily on them. The stairs seemed to go on forever, leading them deeper into the bowels of the mansion. They finally emerged into a vast basement filled with rows of shelves stacked with ancient tomes and strange artifacts. The room was dimly lit by flickering candles, casting eerie shadows on the walls. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate chest, its surface covered in the same strange symbols Mac had seen on the door upstairs. "We need to find something to defend ourselves," Mac said, his voice barely a whisper. He moved toward the chest, his hand shaking as he reached out to open it. The lid creaked open, revealing a collection of weapons, daggers, swords, and strange, twisted implements that looked more like instruments of torture than anything else. Lisa picked up a small, wicked-looking dagger, its blade glinting in the candlelight. "What are these?" she asked, her voice filled with dread. "Tools of the trade," a voice said from the shadows. They turned to see Sebastian Drake standing in the doorway, his eyes glowing with a cold, malevolent light. "These artifacts are not just for show. They have power, and that power comes at a price." "Stay back!" Max shouted, brandishing a sword he had pulled from the chest. Sebastian smiled, a chilling expression that sent a shiver down their spines. "You cannot fight what you do not understand," he said, stepping forward. "This mansion is alive, its very walls infused with the spirits of the damned. You have disturbed their rest, and now you must pay the price." Tony and Danny burst into the basement, their eyes wide with terror. "Mac, we need to get out of here!" Tony shouted, his voice filled with panic. "We're trying!" Mac replied, his eyes never leaving Sebastian. "But he's not going to let us go." Sebastian's smile widened. "You are correct. The spirits demand vengeance, and they will not rest until they have it." The shadows in the room seemed to grow darker, the temperature plummeting. The spirits began to manifest, their ghostly forms emerging from the walls and floor, their eyes burning with a cold, unholy light. They moved toward the group, their faces twisted in anger and sorrow. "We need to fight!" Max shouted, raising his sword. The group backed into a circle, their weapons ready as the spirits closed in. The air was filled with the sounds of ghostly whispers and distant screams, a cacophony of torment that seemed to emanate from the very walls. As the spirits attacked, Max swung his sword, the blade passing through the ghostly forms with little effect. The spirits' touch was icy, their presence draining the warmth from his body. Lisa slashed with her dagger, but it was like fighting smoke, her attacks passing through the spirits harmlessly. Tony and Danny fought desperately, their blows landing with no effect. The spirits seemed to mock them, their ghostly laughter echoing through the basement. The group's fear was palpable, their hope dwindling as the spirits pressed closer. "There's too many of them!" Danny shouted, his voice filled with despair. "We can't fight them all!" "We have to try," Mac replied, his voice shaking with the effort of fighting off the spirits. Sebastian watched from the doorway, his eyes cold and calculating. "You cannot win," he said, his voice filled with dark amusement. "This mansion is a tomb, and you are its newest residents." The spirits surged forward, their ghostly forms overwhelming the group. Mac felt their icy touch, their presence draining his strength. He stumbled, falling to his knees, his sword clattering to the floor. Lisa screamed as a spirit reached out, its hand passing through her chest. The pain was excruciating, a cold fire that seared through her body. She fell to the ground, her dagger slipping from her grasp. Tony and Danny fought on, their desperation giving them strength. But it was a losing battle, the spirits' numbers overwhelming them. Tony swung his crowbar, but it passed through the spirits harmlessly. Danny's knife clattered to the ground as he fell, the spirit's touch draining his life. Mac's vision blurred, the room spinning around him. He could see Lisa lying on the ground, her eyes wide with fear and pain. Tony and Danny were still fighting, but their movements were slow, their strength fading. Sebastian stepped forward, his smile cold and triumphant. "You cannot escape," he said, his voice echoing through the basement. "You belong to the mansion now." Mac's last thought was a bitter realization of the true cost of their greed. The mansion's secrets were not meant to be disturbed, and now they had awakened, hungry for vengeance. The darkness swallowed him, his body falling to the ground, his vision fading to black. The fog rolled back in, thick and unyielding, as the mansion stood silent and foreboding. Inside, the artifacts hummed with a malevolent energy, their spirits sated. For now. Sebastian watched from the shadows, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. His collection was intact, its power undeniable. The mansion waited, as it always did, for the next group of fools to succumb to its deadly allure. The scene shifted as Sebastian left the mansion, his footsteps echoing in the silence. In the darkness, the artifacts whispered to each other, their voices low and filled with malevolence. They had been disturbed, their rest interrupted, and their anger was far from sated. The mansion, with its shifting walls and haunted rooms, was a prison for the unwary and a fortress for the malevolent spirits bound within its confines. Outside, the fog began to lift slightly, revealing the path that led back to the world of the living. But for those inside, the mansion was an inescapable trap, a labyrinth of horrors that held them captive. Sebastian's figure disappeared into the night, leaving.
Thank you for joining us on Fear Files. Stay tuned for more chilling tales where fear meets fascination and explore the depths of history's darkest secrets. Subscribe and turn on notifications to never miss an episode as we journey deeper into the unknown. Until next time, may you find courage in the face of the collector's wrath.